Okay, so far we've not talked too much about debugging. You've seen me use the debugger in a couple of live demos, but you've probably gotten the idea now that debugging software as a service compared to debugging a command line app can be a little tricky. Part of it is that there's a lot of moving parts. A URI arrives, the routing system has to get involved, then there's a controller action that runs, it talks to the model, then there's a view, and finally it gets rendered. So errors can happen sort of at any point in this pipeline, and sometimes you only see the result of the error at a much later stage than when it happened. And it's even harder if the error is not absolutely consistent, like only some routes or only some users are affected by it. So what are the different things that you can do to debug SAS, and how does it sort of differ from debugging a command line app? You can do what some people call printf debugging. The fancy name is instrumentation. It's at strategic times, you print out the values of things and you look at what those values are. If you're in development, you see that there's a terminal window and you can sort of see things scrolling by. It's not easy to read, but at least it's there. But in production, there isn't a terminal window. So printf debugging or instrumentation doesn't really work in a production environment because there is nowhere for the output to reasonably go. Same thing with Rails console. You can run an interactive console. You can run a console on Heroku too, but depending on what the nature of the bug is, you might not be able to sort of capture the bug happening in real time with Rails console. You can do interactive calls to the debugger. In development, that's great. You've seen me do it a bunch of times in demos so that we can sort of inspect the state of the world. Obviously, you can't sort of put a live breakpoint into your running app. That would be a disaster. Logging is the one thing that works in both. Rails has a nice abstraction for logging, and you can print log messages at various levels of severity, like this is informational, this is for debugging, this is a super critical bad thing that should never ever happen. And Heroku has support for what I'll call logging as a service, where you can actually get your Rails logs exported to another tool, you can view them with a nice GUI, you can search for things, you can set up alerts so that if certain kinds of exceptions happen in your app, you'll get an email about it or you'll get a text message about it. Like everything else, a service abstraction around logging is really, really powerful. And if you search for Rails guides, by the way, the Rails guides are excellent on all the topics, but the one on the debugger is particularly useful because it is the most powerful way to debug as you go when you're in development mode. My acronym for how you approach solving a debugging problem is RASP, which is read, ask, search, and post. So debugging is a fact of life. You're going to spend more time debugging than writing code if you're like most people. The first thing to do is read the error message carefully. There's a lot of information in an error message, and somewhere in there is the first place in your app that is implicated. So yeah, Rails has a bunch of files that it uses, Heroku, your app server, but somewhere in there, there's going to be a line that points to one of your files. Find that line and see how you got there. Once you have some background on what's going on, find someone who is experienced and ask them an informed question. The more specific, the better. That also will put you in a position, if they cannot answer it, to write a post on Stack Overflow after you've done a good search. If you help others help you, remember that everybody on Stack Overflow, everybody in the class is just as busy as you. So help them help you by providing minimal but complete information. What do I mean by minimal? Don't just say, here's my 50-line error message, here's my controller, I can't make it work. What is the minimum amount that you can show them that has enough information to characterize what went wrong? And ideally, even an example that they could reproduce, like a minimal app that reproduces, and a precise narrative of what you've already tried. So not just a stack trace, and not just an error message with no context, but when I saw this error, I tried this. Or I looked in the debugger at this variable, I expected it to have this value, but for some reason it has this other value. So the more you can narrow down where you're stuck. By the way, also a great way to talk to your TA during office hours. When you are reading that message, the backtrace, which is what you usually get, will show you the entire call stack all the way from when the HTTP request was received. A lot of that probably won't matter to you, but the point where it starts touching your app, usually in the controller, it will start being interesting. A very common Ruby error is something like undefined method on nil class, which really just means you tried to call something like a.foo, but a is nil, and a therefore cannot possibly respond to the foo method. More than often, it means that you had an assignment that silently failed and you didn't do an error check. For example, if you're using active records find by to say, find me a movie that has this ID, there exists the possibility that the movie with that ID doesn't exist, and what you'll get back is nil, and now you try to call the method title and you're calling it on nil. So the message looks cryptic, but usually that means the real error happened a while ago. It happened wherever you tried to assign the thing, and you didn't check the result of that assignment. Printf-based debugging. You can do it. In a view, you could say debug and pass it a model instance, and you will get in line in your HTML a human readable representation of what those values are right now. You can also say inspect, which gives you a somewhat more verbose representation. Please don't forget to take that out of your views before you deploy the app, or your real live users will be very surprised. You can also look in the logs. If in Rails you call logger.debug, you can put information into the logs, and then you can review the logs at your leisure. Or on Heroku, you keep that information turned on, and you can use logging as a service user interfaces to search for all occurrences of a particular error message. And you can see when they were timestamped and which part of your Rails app generated them and so forth. But don't confuse logging with puts or printf or something like that, right? Puts or printf just say send stuff to the terminal. In production, there isn't really a terminal. There's not an abstraction for that. Whereas the logger is an abstract class that says, do whatever it takes to get this thing into the log. And so if you're on Heroku and you connect one of the many logging as a service to your app, what the logger will really do is send the information to it, rather than trying to put it in a file somewhere. And of course, use the internet. Google. Find the verbs and nouns in the thing you want to do, and you'd be surprised how far you can get. Like, how do I format a date in Ruby? Search for those 3 words in red, and you will find a number of answers. Check the documentation. The Rails docs are usually very good. They're also searchable, and check Stack Overflow. But again, the more keywords you have, the more precise you'll be. We periodically collect feedback from students at the end of the class. What were sort of the top 10 things that you would give advice to your colleagues about? This one is number 1, reusing others' work. Do a little bit of searching, and you'll find stuff that you can reuse rather than invent the wheel. Learning to use Google and Stack Overflow effectively helped us be more productive. For every 5 minutes I spent writing code, I spent an hour searching the internet. I love that one, by the way, because that is not unusual. Sometimes people do that and they think, I'm really stupid. It took me forever to find the information I needed to write these 10 lines of code. That's actually really good because it means those 10 lines are well informed. Concise code that is tight and does the right thing and is readable and does the thing the right way, that's super valuable. You just saved the person after you hours and hours in trying to understand stuff. So if you find yourself spending the same or more time searching for stuff as producing code, you're probably on the right track. It means that you're writing code that is careful. And students who didn't do this as much, they wish they had done it sooner rather than just sort of banging their heads against the wall. They wish that they had sort of appreciated that when you're writing code completely from scratch, even though Rails gives you a little bit of boilerplate, that is a lot different than having a bunch of starter code where you're just filling in the blanks. So, we're playing in the big leagues now, so to speak. And the more adept that you get at sort of using these debugging tools and finding answers to the questions, not only will you be a better Rails and Sass programmer, but you will put yourself in a position to pick up any new framework and apply all of these same ideas.